Hi guys, welcome to another bio lesson, and today's lesson will be on population growth. Now, objectives for today include understanding and explaining the factors that affect growth of natural populations. We will also discuss why man is not under the same constraints as other organisms. So why is man growing exponentially more than other animals? We will then analyze population growth curves, and then we will explain how the growing population affects the resources that are present in the environment. Good, so we've listed our objectives. Now let's flow right into it. Now, a population is a group of organisms who are of the same species and are capable of interbreeding. Remember that? So we discussed this in length when we looked at ecology, right, and abiotic and biotic factors, and we said that a population must be comprised of individuals from the same species, and they must be able to interbreed to produce fertile offsprings. That is what differentiates between that population and a different population. So members within the same population can interbreed to produce a fertile offspring. Now, we know that in an ecosystem, it is composed of many different populations, and populations make up communities, right? So when we have an area with several populations interacting, that is a community. And an ecosystem may be comprised of several communities interacting on a daily basis, and they're occupying the same space, the same environmental field. And this interaction may be a predator-prey relationship, they may be fighting, they may be competing for food, it may be a mutualistic relationship, it may be a parasitic relationship. All of that comprises interaction happening on a daily basis. And these interactions and the environment that the organisms are in on the daily basis, they affect the rate of growth of that population, right? So those who are experiencing favorable interactions as opposed to negative ones, or they're not competing, they don't have to be escaping prey every single second, then they have a greater ability to grow. They have the greater ability to survive, reproduce, thereby producing more offsprings, and so their population will grow. But those who are experiencing difficulties within the population, too much competition, too much fighting, too much searching for food, and they just cannot sustain everybody, some individuals will begin to die. The success of organisms within that ecosystem depends on their ability to grow, and their ability to grow is measured based on the success of that species as a population. So how many of them are able to survive to reproduction, right? That will determine which organisms are more successful than others. Now, their success depends on their ability to respond to changes in the environment, and different factors will change and may affect their ability to reproduce and thereby increase as a population. Some of these factors include space. So space might become limiting, and there are too many individuals in the population, and so they cannot grow. It cannot sustain so many persons, and so some individuals will die. Food, right? All of us need to eat. We need to consume food in some way or another. And remember, nutrition is a characteristic of life. So if we're not getting food, then we won't have energy. And if we don't have energy, then we don't have any energy to do any kind of activity that includes running to escape a predator, the beating of a heart if you have a heart, sleeping, thinking, moving of any sort. All of that requires energy. So food is very important. Diseases, or ability to fight disease, is very important, right? So your immune system, how strong is it? Some individuals have stronger immune systems than others, and they are able to fight off infections better than others, and so they will be at an advantage because they are able to overcome this disease, but the other individual may not be so lucky. Also, in our common society, we know that some persons aren't able to afford healthcare, and so those persons who cannot afford proper healthcare, they're at a disadvantage, and they may not have access to something that may save their lives. As it relates to a disease, they may not have the medication, it may not be readily available, or they just cannot afford it. And so being able to resist diseases is very important. Also natural disasters, so like storms, hurricanes, tsunamis, all of these are natural disasters, and the list goes on, right? I'm sure you can think of a few more, earthquakes, etc. So when natural disasters happen, usually the face of the environment changes drastically. So usually food availability is reduced, occurrences of diseases increase, and space is also limiting. So natural disasters can affect all these other factors as well. And then there are biotic factors. These are the different relationships and interactions that happens between species within a community. So we have symbiotic relationships, whether favorable or not. We have predator-prey relationships. So are these species being hunted? And so the list goes on, right? So anything that would affect the ability of the species to continue as it relates to a biotic living relationship. So do they have access to food from plants, etc.? Competition, are they competing with another species for these other resources? Then there is availability of water, and if you live in water, dissolved oxygen. These are essential, especially to plants, right? Water is essential mainly to plants. Water is very important for animals as well, but plants use water to make food during photosynthesis. And if the plant doesn't make the food, then the herbivore has nothing to eat, no energy content to gain from the plant either. Animals need oxygen for respiration. Climatic changes, is it too hot? Is it too cold? Are we able to function in this temperature? So climate can actually determine if a population is growing. Also, light, especially if it's an aquatic organism. Remember, light doesn't penetrate deep down into deep waters, and so organisms tend to be more abundant closer to the surface of the water. So those that are deep down can be competing for light. They may need to adapt in certain ways so that they can survive with this limited access to light, and the climate of that environment would be different also. So all these factors, and you may be able to think of more, all these factors affect the ability of a population to grow. Now, the amount or the number of individuals that can be supported by a specific environment, a specific ecosystem, is finite, meaning that they cannot exceed a certain amount. This maximum amount, or the maximum population size, is known as the carrying capacity, the maximum number of individuals that the environment can sustain, right? So there's limited space, there's limited food, there's limited water, there's limited light, right? And so it can only sustain a specific number of individuals. Now, we use growth curves to display the rate of growth of population. So we would track the growth of the population by looking at the number of individuals in the population over a specific period of time. And usually for a regular population, we will see what we call a normal distribution curve, or normal growth curve, that is described as being S-shaped or sigmoid, right? So we see a sigmoid growth curve. So the curve will look somewhat like an S, something like that. Now, for simplicity and to explain what is happening at each phase of the curve, we have divided the curve into 4 main phases. The first phase is a period of slow growth, also called the lag phase, because it's also lagging behind or moving very slowly. Then we have a period of significant or exponential growth, and this is also called the log phase. Then we have a period where growth is declining or it is slowing, right? So growth may or may not be occurring. And then we have the stationary phase, where it's almost as if there is no further growth, and so the curve does not neither increases nor decreases, it just continues on a straight plane. Now let's look at a graphical representation of what we're talking about. Now this is the typical growth curve. And as you can see, the curve has a somewhat S-shape or sigmoid shape. The line of the curve is slightly S-shaped. And we're going to just create some divisions on our curve right now to depict the 4 phases. Okay, so I've divided the graph into different sections and I've represented them with A, B, C, D, and E respectively. Now the first section, A, represents that first period of slow growth, which is the lag phase, right? And what happens here is maybe this species has just inhabited or moved into the environment, and so growth is slow because the number of individuals in the population is relatively low, and so mating occurs at a slower rate because there are fewer individuals in the population to mate with. But as we can see, it is slowly increasing. And by the time we get to B, it starts to increase significantly. Now, the population basically doubles each time, and there is a sharp or a steep increase occurring at B, which makes it the exponential phase or log phase, right? So it's called either one. And here, though the population is growing at this point in time, food is abundant, and there is plenty of individuals to mate with. And also incidence of death and diseases is low. So space is available, water is available. All the factors that I mentioned before, they are abundant in this phase right now. And this fosters growth at a significantly high rate. So this is a period of rapid growth. Now in C, this is the second period of slow growth. And this occurs because, as you can see, by the time we get to part C, we are approaching the carrying capacity. And remember, the carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that can be sustained successfully within this population, because there's a limited space, there's a limited water supply, limited food supply. So if the number of individuals in the population are increasing, right? If they are increasing, for example, whatever food source that they're feeding on, that will start to decrease eventually, because there are too many of them now for this food supply to sustain, right? So imagine if you have an apple tree outside your house, right? And you and your neighbor always pick from the apple tree, and then you tell other kids in the neighborhood about it. And every day, kids from all around the neighborhood come and pick apples from the one apple tree. By the end of the week, the apples on the tree are going to be finished, and there will be no more for you and your neighbor, which leads to death because the apple was your main food source, right? All the children in the neighborhood heard about it. All of them came, and so the population size for that apple tree environment increased. The apple tree had a specific number of apples to sustain you and your neighbor, which would have lasted a longer period of time had you not told the other neighbor's children, right? Since they have eaten all the apples, then there will be no more for you and your friends, so that eventually would lead to death. So it's the same concept. The carrying capacity is a limit to the amount of resources that there are available within the population to sustain the population. So once we start approaching that limit, once the number of individuals in the population start to get too high, then that is going to affect the curve that we get and also the further growth in the population. So ideally, if there was no carrying capacity, and this is only in theory, the curve would have continued going up like this, right? And I'm just going to represent that with G. So this is the hypothetical curve. And there is a curve that goes somewhat like this, and we're going to look at that shortly. So this is a hypothetical representation of what would have happened if the apple tree had no carrying capacity, if there was just continued production of food, no stopping, right? But everything has a limit, and so there is a maximum number of individuals that can be sustained. Now, because of this, and now the number of individuals in this population is too high, we get to D, which is the stationary phase. Now here, the population is now experiencing stable growth. Now, there may be minor fluctuations as well due to factors increasing or decreasing slightly. So maybe water availability went up a little, maybe it went down a little bit. And so actually what happens here is a small wave-like increase or decrease depending on what is happening in the environment. So here, there is no further increase nor decrease. And something else that I'd like to point out is that in order for the population to grow, that means that new individuals must have been introduced into the population. So at B, the population is reproducing, and quite a lot, I might add. Now, if the number of persons being born is equal to the number of persons dying, then there will be no growth, and that is what is happening at D. So at D, the number of births is equal to the number of deaths in the population. So you can imagine that at B, the number of births far exceeded the number of deaths, and so the population was increasing in size significantly. So at D, death rate and birth rate are equal, and so we see that as we represent that as a straight line, continuous, no further increase or decrease, nothing significant. But what is happening at E? Now at E, I've placed E there because E can represent something drastic happening in the population. For example, like a massive flood or some other type of natural disaster and introduction of a new disease, and so the population begins to plummet, right? So this can be death or outbreak of diseases. Okay, so this is the typical population growth curve, but the human population growth curve does not look exactly like this. It actually looks somewhat different, and that is because, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing me saying this, industrialization. So let's look at the human growth curve. Now, the human population size is increasing every day at a significantly alarming rate, right? So it is very high, and it is increasing more and more each year. When compared to thousands of years ago, population rate was very, very slow, right? There wasn't as much individuals inhabiting the earth as there are now. And this is mainly because of the industrial age and human beings becoming more technologically advanced. We have now things in place that are helping us to deal with these limited resources. So the resources that I'm referring to are like space, water, food, and we have come up with ways to enhance those resources or help to keep them around longer, and the fruitfulness of that has been seen in our population growth over the years. Now, the curve is described as being a J-shaped curve, so it looks somewhat like this, right? Instead of an S, it goes up. Remember, ideally, if we look back at the typical population growth curve, I had mentioned that hypothetical growth shape G that can occur. Well, this is that hypothetical or ideal situation had there not been a carrying capacity. So what we're doing with these advances, it's almost as if we're raising the carrying capacity of the environment, because those resources that were once limiting or are still limiting, we have made them less limiting, if you understand what I'm saying. We have made some of these, not all, some of them more abundant, and we are now able to escape things like diseases with vaccines and testing for diseases, thereby helping us to live longer and being able to reproduce, so on and so forth. So let's go back. So the main reasons why the human population growth curve displays a J-shaped curve as opposed to an S-shaped curve, it's mainly because of improvements in agriculture. So we are producing better quality food, greater quantity as well. We have public health improvements, right? So we have cleaner environments, less outbreak of disease, clean water, etc. We have better medical care facilities and improved technological devices. We have vaccines. We have machines to help us in the medical industry. We have medications that are generated as well. And then there are other technological advancements that we use to make our work easier. And so there's less stress on us, on our bodies, and we are able to function better. So like our tractors, cars, bikes, you name it. Now let's look at the curve itself and how these factors have significantly changed the human population growth rate over the years. Now in 1750, long before the period of industrialization, the human population was significantly low, right? So over to the left, the axis that you're seeing, the y-axis you're seeing on the left is representing the population size in billions. So we have significantly less than 2 billion individuals being present in the world in the 1750s. Now, as time went by, there was no significant increase up until about a little after 1900, where it started to increase, and this point may have been the industrialization period. Right, so we are becoming more civilized, more technologically advanced, and we have better healthcare. So all these resources are increasing over the years because we're getting better and better and finding better ways to do things. And so you see that as a sharp increase occurring. So if I were to create a grid like I did before, right, so I've created the grid and I've labeled the sections A, B, C respectively. Now the first period, as I was saying before, was the pre-industrialization period, and then B is showing you the post-industrialization period, where we have become more civilized, more technologically advanced, better healthcare, better public health facilities, and so the population is increasing steadily and exponentially, right? So growth at this point in time accelerates. But at C, even though there is a projected increase in general, we're seeing that the bars are decreasing between 1998 to the projected year of 2050. And that is because we have now become aware that the population size is becoming too much. And even though we have ways of overcoming the limited resources, still the environment is only so big. It can hold only so many organisms and no more. Right? So in places like China and India, those places are significantly overpopulated and it is causing a problem. There is no space. There is limited food, there is limited access to certain resources, and so persons are moving away, right? And it's not just these countries, many more actually, and all countries in the world are seeing a significant increase in their population size. And so this awareness has made humans more concerned and more determined to minimize or limit their population size. And some things that they have done to cause this decrease is like they have used industrialization again to come up with birth control methods. So we have a wide range of birth control methods to utilize to prevent unplanned births. Right? And we have also different surgical methods as well. Also, diseases are playing a role in this decrease as well. So in recent times, there has been outbreaks of different diseases: chikungunya, AIDS, syphilis, herpes, cancer. Yes, I'm sure we can all relate to cancer. You may have a relative or a friend who has had cancer. They may have survived, some did not survive, right? So disease play an important role as well as natural disasters. So around the world, we're hearing about earthquakes and tsunamis and tornadoes, right? Hurricanes destroying Caribbean islands. So those things, those factors are now occurring more frequently than they would normally occur at that. So I don't know if it's a natural selection mechanism that's happening, but the population is being placed in check by nature, it seems. So these natural disasters are occurring more frequently, and it may be because of us as well. As you would have learned in our previous lesson, that our activities do affect the environment and the climate and how hot the place is, and things like these, they affect the occurrence of hurricanes and some other natural disasters. So our increased presence is also negatively affecting us. So in essence, these advancements that man has devised, they have resulted in us having a greater life expectancy, and so fewer individuals are now dying from incidents of diseases as well as other ailments. Now, man has the ability to generate more food because of industrialization, as mentioned before, space, they can fight diseases, and they are able to avoid predator, and this has resulted in an increased chance of surviving to adulthood and reproducing. So less persons are dying while more persons are being born, so that results in an increase in growth. And if the death rate is lower than the birth rate, then the population will continue to grow. So if that does not change, then growth won't decrease or won't become stable. If the death rate is higher than the birth rate, then a population will not grow. So there will be a decrease in growth. Good. I touched on some of these before, some factors that may help to keep the population in check, specifically the human population. These include limited resources. So even though we can increase the quantity of some, we cannot increase the quantity of all, right? So we can't affect all resources, and so we can only adjust the carrying capacity to a finite distance, right? At some point, there's just going to be too many individuals in a given area and it will just not be able to function. Natural disasters, as mentioned before, diseases, the availability of food, birth control, and possibly crime. I don't know. What do you think? So crime does help to keep the population in check, even though it's not a good thing. These persons are dying way before their time, right? But the point is the population size would decrease because crime results in death most times. Now, as seen in our last presentation about man's activities and how it affects their surroundings, it affects their surroundings in three main ways. Man pollutes the area, land, air, and sea. They overuse natural resources, and they cut down trees, which is known as deforestation, and this leads to soil erosion, leaching, decreased water source, drought, etc. So man can negatively affect his surroundings, and you can just go and have a look at the previous lesson and you will see in further detail how man has affected his environment, why his increased presence is now negatively affecting the environment. Why should we not exceed the carrying capacity of the environment? And with that said, we've come to the end of our presentation, but before we go, let's do a quick summary. So the typical population has an S-shaped or sigmoid curve, and the factors or resources that affect the amount of individuals being present in the area, that is the factors that affect the growth, include space, water, food, oxygen, light, biotic factors like predators, symbiosis, etc., and you can name some more. The human growth curve is J-shaped, and they have the ability to exceed the carrying capacity due to advancements in industrialization. So we saw that as time went by, the number of individuals in the population increased. So in 1770, we only had a few individuals in the population, and then by the time we got to the 2000s, we had a significant increase in members of the population and a few technological advancements as well. Right. Factors that limit the population size include diseases. So we might have an outbreak of a disease like Ebola, the most common outbreak that was severely deadly and killing a lot of persons in Sierra Leone and some other African countries. Natural disasters, contraception, crime, and you can think of a few more. So that's our lesson for today. I'll see you next time when we will discuss cells, cell structure and function, and also cellular specialization.